You know that feeling you get when you play something that follows a familiar formula for ages, but then it gets changed in order to cater to filthy casuals? I mean, more accessible to a wider audience, but then something gets lost along the way and it doesn't feel quite like it should be part of the series? Well, that's pretty much how I feel about 15 compared to the rest of the franchise. But then again, this is the same franchise that gave 13 2 sequels when we would have been happy had 13 never been made in the first place, and for some reason, Square Enix are determined to mine the Final Fantasy VII gold vein until it's run out. Actually, scratch that, they'll mine it even after its long run out, considering that we've got an FF7 third-person shooter coming out for the mobile phone that a whopping 0 people asked for. So even if you're struggling to get through the global pandemic, at least there's a third-person mobile shooter to look forward to. Anyway. Now, that's not to say that this is a bad game or anything. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to say that at any point during this video. But that's not going to stop me talking about how some parts of this game are about as dumb as trying to pick yourself up in a bucket. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's talk about the, plot of this game first, and how it plays. So the game starts out near the end. Whoops, let's try that one again. So the game starts out with your father, the king, sending you off to get married to insert generic female character plus death flag here. But instead of hiring the Rolls Royce to pick you up, your 3 friends, who I swear will spontaneously burst into flames and die were you to get more than 5 meters away from them, are going to take you to the ceremony instead. So you say your goodbyes to your father, yeah, another death flag right there, and head out to get married in order to presumably secure an alliance with one of the other nations and begin your newlywed and happy life. But that all changed when the Fire Nation attacked, because the second you get down the road, Niflheim launches an attack on the city and murders your father. It's Niflheim, I know that, not Niflheim, but I'm going to call it that from now on. Also, you find out that your fiancé is dead, but then again, your death is all over the news too, and you're pretty sure you're not actually dead, so that one's up for debate too. It is now up to you, and I guess the 3 others who are with you, to A, find out if your fiancé is still alive, and B, take back your throne. And to do this, you and your faithful servants are first of all going to break down in a desert. Okay, great start there, guys. So you end up in a small area called Hammerhead that consists of a garage. Whoa, plot convenience, when did you get here? And a shop as well. You meet up with this game's mandatory inclusion of Sid, who's a grumpy old man, and Cindy, who doesn't have much going for her other than something to look at. Incidentally, you get introduced to a camera feature at this point, where you can take photos of locations, characters, and moments during quests and combat to remind you of your travels. But later in the game, I realised that I only had 1 photo with me, other than the ones that the game makes you carry, and that just happened to be a picture of Cindy's chest. But I swear I took that particular picture for, science? And to see if the game recognised this and got it to criticise me. She did not, though. At this point the game goes open world and you can drive around totally not California in your car and do main missions, side missions, other optional objectives, collectibles and such. And usually at this point I'll say, so without giving too much away when talking about the story, but I really don't care this time, and if spoilers really are an issue for you here then maybe you shouldn't have clicked the video. Take that as your mandatory spoiler alert warning, you precious cherub. Luna Freya, aka your fiancée, turns up not dead for a bit, but then she changes her mind and turns up actually dead. There's this guy called Arden who can teleport in and out of wherever he likes and comes across as if he has creative mode enabled with cheats, while the rest of us are stuck in vanilla hardcore survival mode. Also, he turns out to be the main bad guy. There's a Dragoon in here, but she's not important. And then you've got this game's version of Espers, or Primals, or Aeons, or whatever you feel like calling them, and they're usually boss fights, some of which are relatively fun to do, such as Ifrit near the end of the game, and I think Bahamut was another one as well. But then you've got bosses that are hyped up to be really intense fights, but just end up being pushovers or QTEs, like Titan. No, seriously, I can't describe how much of a letdown the Titan boss fight was. I mean, look at him! He's bloody huge! I get that fighting him in the same way as other enemies is going to be like pissing in the wind here, but if you're gonna hype up the intensity of a fight before we start it, then at least give us some payoff. As for the end of the game, we'll come back to that at the end of the video, since I've got some very choice things to say about that, but for the time being, let's move on to the actual gameplay. So given that this is Final Fantasy, and there's going to be some combat in here somewhere, I think it's worth talking about that for a little bit. And I'm happy to say that the combat in this game is actually rather enjoyable. It's got a mostly good level of difficulty in that enemies aren't a pushover, but at the same time they're not going to punish you with cheap shit just because you're in the vicinity. Unlike some games in this series, Final Fantasy XV's combat is mostly real-time this time round, in which you can perform different abilities and attacks during combat, but then there's also parrying and dodging going on as well. You've also got the power of the king, and what that means is that you can essentially teleport to nearby objects and areas mid-combat, such as on top of a rock or a lamppost, or even hang from a ledge, etc. This gives the player several advantages in battle, including getting you out of there if things are getting too tough, and you want a moment to reevaluate the situation before throwing yourself back into the meat grinder, but you can also launch yourself from here at enemies again, which will deal a lot of damage if done right. I don't think you're encouraged to spam the shit out of this feature in all situations, though that may be a good way of cheesing the game if you know what you're doing. I actually managed to kill Quetzalcoatl in under 3 minutes with no damage taken by getting those 3 stalkers who won't leave you alone to do a combo attack near the start, and then I zipped around the area launching attack after attack so fast to the point where the boss was thinking of quitting its job and doing something less dangerous, like accounting or something. Oh yeah, you can use your friends to chain some attacks together too if you've managed to charge up their action bars, but honestly, I was never too sure of what was happening during this part, since all I ever noticed was Noctis shouting, "Gladio, Ignis Pronto!" and then the enemy takes some damage. But then again, the combat isn't perfect either. There will be times where the camera lets slip that it actually has ADHD and starts doing its own thing against your will, like rotating the screen so that a nearby rock or bush fills up the screen during combat, to the point where you'll start to get the feeling that this bush is the real main character of this story after all, and this whole thing with Noctis, that's you by the way, is just an elaborate setup to the real story. The side and optional content is very hit and miss, however. Some of it's okay and worth doing just for the extra rewards, while some of it is questionable at best. There are optional dungeons that can be found around the map, and honestly, I really like those parts. I felt that they were hard enough to be enjoyed, but were also quite rewarding. There are hunting missions you could do as well, or if you're feeling up to it, you could try breaking into an enemy compound and giving them a bad day. But not at night though. In fact, don't do anything at night. The moment the sun goes down, incredibly powerful enemies will spawn and trudge around the map, and they will wreck your shit if you go near them. Which begs the question of why they haven't wiped out all life in this part of the world by now, but I guess we're not to think too hard on that one. But then there's the not so good content. Pronto will frequently ask you to pull the car over so he can take pictures. There's this one quest where you have to give a fish to a cat. That's what £20 gets you these days. Final Fantasy at its best. There are several quests where you need to go to really dangerous areas to collect some bugs or some shit, and then there's also another quest where you have to fix some electrical pylons. I kid you not. And for those of you who have played this one and have tried to fight the optional boss that's the size of a mountain, then you have my respect, because even if you didn't manage to kill it, I took one look at it and noped so hard out of there that I'd actually forgotten that fight even existed until, like, literally just now. And speaking of side content, I can't let this section of the video pass by without talking about crossovers and promotional content. So back when I played this game, a new update came out that featured a crossover quest between this game and Final Fantasy XIV, and after having done both crossover quests, first in this and then in Final Fantasy XIV, I can safely say that if any of you out there have only just done the one in 14 and thought it was super weird how the Warrior of Light looked upon Noctis during their romantic and awkward camping trip as if they've known him their entire life, then don't worry, because it turns out that you had the better of the two experiences. I mean, you ended up with a flying car for a mount, so stop complaining. A totally sus camping trip, and more screen time for Sid was a small price to pay to hear Country Roads playing whilst flying about in your car. Meanwhile, in Final Fantasy XV's crossover quest, it was flat out weird. It starts out with a Mikote being sat on by a fat chocobo. Then you have to go to a Niflheim compound and try to infiltrate it because they're trying to summon Garuda. You fight some enemies while your catgirl companion clearly registered for this as Scholar, but is only aware of Physic, since that's the only spell she casts, and you can tell that's the only spell she casts because she feels it's necessary to shout it every time she casts it. Naturally, she didn't get my commendation at the end, but anyway. You fail to prevent Garuda's summoning and you have to fight her, but as you defeat her, you get sucked into a portal and disappear, but only for about a minute. Then you get spat back out the portal, and Noctis is all like, "Whoa, I was in another world for weeks. There were talking potatoes, lol dragoons, and everyone kept demanding that their healer adjust. Also, there was a guy with a white beard and dreamy eyes. I don't know why, but all I know is, I desire him to be my new father." And that's the quest. You're not missing out on this one if you've not played it. And while we're on the topic of crossover quests, if your game is going to include one, try to make sure that it fits somehow and not ruin the continuity of your game, even if that game was bonkers to begin with. And the reason I'm saying all of this is because I encountered a Final Fantasy XV crossover quest in Assassin's Creed Origins! And I played that game right after finishing 15. And the quest made no sense! Not that Assassin's Creed makes much sense these days anyway, but adding in a quest where you explore an ancient tomb only for Bahamut and Ardyn to show up and battle each other in the skies above Upper Egypt made my eyes roll out of my head so hard that rumour has it that to this day they can be found rolling down the main roads of Europe. But if it's not crossover quests, then it's promotional content that's pissing me off, for Final Fantasy XV has one of the most egregious examples of aggressive marketing that I have ever seen in any modern video game. It's so bad that it's hilarious. Let me explain. So throughout the game, whether you're in town or driving about the countryside, you'll find adverts on billboards, on the sides of trucks, and in shops for cup noodles. And this isn't exactly the first time that a game has featured product placement in their games, and you know what? I don't even mind it that much. So long as it's not being pushed on me, then I don't really care, providing it's not adverts for Raid Shadow Legends. Speaking of which, here's the sponsor of today's video. But Final Fantasy XV's promotion of cup noodles overstepped its mark here with an entire quest dedicated to how supposedly amazing this instant and convenient food product is, to the point where the quest ends with Gladio giving a speech to everyone about how cup noodles is convenient, delicious, an excellent meal that can be enjoyed anywhere, whether it be at home, on the road, in the car, or by river, wherever good times can be found. But most of all, cup noodles is best enjoyed with friends. Friends who also enjoy cup noodles. Friends who will stay by your side even after you've finished your cup noodles. Friends who will never turn their back on you, regardless of how you choose to eat your cup noodles. And that's what makes cup noodles the best food of all time. And better yet, you can pick up your own cup noodles at your local convenience store. For the love of God, Gladio, shut the fuck up! We all know that cup noodles is just the international version of pot noodles, and none of us are buying it. Seriously, the first time I did this quest, the moment Gladio stopped giving his I love cup noodles speech, I was honestly expecting him to look off camera for a second and grab the check that was being handed to him for a job well done. Well, since I've mentioned a few of the other characters by name, I'd better talk about the four mains then, since you're going to be seeing a lot of them for most of the game. You play the part of Hocus Pocus. Sorry, I mean Noctis. Damn it! I mean Lucius Calum Noctis. No, I mean... Oh, wait, I actually got it that time. Noctis is what I've heard people refer to as a soy boy, and while I'm not exactly sure what that means since I'm 70 years old, he does look like a generic modern characterless Final Fantasy character and has the lack of personality to match. So congrats to anyone who thought this guy doesn't have much going for him, you get to move on to the next round. Wait, I've got it now, I've just figured it out, he looks like he belongs in Kingdom Hearts rather than this. It's okay everyone, we got it that time. There's Gladiolus, who is probably my favourite out of the four, but saying that he's my favourite out of the four is like saying that out of all of my fingers, I would rather lose a ring finger. Gladiolus was my favourite character mainly because of that one time just prior to the Titan boss fight, where he told Noctis to stop being a pussy, but then he'd later go on to start dating cup noodles, so he went down in my eyes if I'm being honest. Pronto, on the other hand, is just irritating. He's supposed to be the comic relief of the group, but I never found him funny. It doesn't help that his jokes are stock audio lines either, so if you laughed the first time at them, then I guarantee that you won't be laughing after hearing them for the 100th time. Incidentally, I never found #sorry not sorry to be funny either. Pronto stood out for me though for one scene where he goes up onto the roof of a motel with Noctis and basically pours his heart out to him. It's the only time I actually felt something for this guy. He confides in Noctis about how he feels that he's worthless to the group, since he's not actually providing anything of value, whereas everyone else has a specific skill or talent that the group as a whole is benefiting from. Pronto wonders if maybe the group would be better off without him, and is also worried that he might be irritating them with his photography, and perhaps it'd be best if he were to just leave the group. Meanwhile, Noctis just sits there awkwardly and is like, haha, yeah. And that's the problem with this group. They don't act like real humans. their relationship isn't believable. Not because of the situation they're in, because that's crazy enough anyway, but hey, this is a video game, so forget that. What I'm saying is that their relationship isn't believable because of how they interact with one another. Normal people don't act like this, even if they're best friends. They act as if their friendship with each other means more than literally anything else in the world. And while that's a nice message to convey to your audience, it's also making me feel a little confused, because I can't tell if these guys just really enjoy each other's company, or if we're about to see an X-rated harem, and maybe this game should be an 18. I mean, this game takes the phrase bros before hoes way too seriously. There are times where Noctis seems to be way more interested in the three dudes that are with him, rather than the fact that his dad has just been murdered, and his betrothed is missing, presumably dead, and then later very actually dead. And then there's Ignis. I didn't mind this guy too much to begin with, but he became the one character who irritated me the most. As mentioned earlier, tougher enemies spawn at night, and it's recommended that when the sun starts setting, you head back to a safe location and turn in for the night. But the game feels the need to remind you of this every time the sun starts to set, and when I say game, I mean Ignis. Several times when I returned to a motel just in time for nightfall, I'd pull up the car and start getting out, but no sooner had I regained control of Noctis, Ignis would approach me, initiating a cutscene, and he'd tell me that it's getting dark and perhaps it would be wise to look for somewhere to sleep for the night. And all I wanted to do in these moments was to direct his attention to the big neon lights that were literally above his goddamn head that said motel, and then slap him for wasting time in telling me to do something that we'd actually be doing right now if he had not felt the need to stop me in my tracks. So don't worry, Pronto, if you're feeling that you're the useless one here, you're not the only one. To be fair to Ignis though, he does have some uses. He also prepares the group meals when you're out and about, and by him I mean you, at a campfire with crafting materials that you find throughout the game. That doesn't stop Ignis shouting Eureka, and he's come up with a new recipe every time you come across an ingredient that you've not found before, but while I couldn't give a fuck mate, the timing of his exclamations are often weird. You'll be fighting a group of soldiers and attack puppers, and the moment the fight is over and everyone is licking their wounds, Ignis would look at the bloodied bodies of the fallen and then go,
"That's it!
What's up, Iggy?
I've come up with a new recipe."
You know, because the first thing that goes through his mind the moment combat ends is how to prepare food. I'd love to see that happen in professional boxing, where a new heavyweight champion takes the microphone right after winning and is like, "I'd just like to say, to all of you out there who have shown me nothing but love and support this whole time, to all of you who stayed with me, even in my darkest hour, I'd just like to say, I've come up with a new recipe." Also, Ignis may be the only character, not only from games but in all forms of media, who got permanently blinded, and my reaction to that was, oh thank God for that, maybe he'll shut the fuck up from now on. Then there's the ending to this game, and honestly I wasn't a fan. It feels like when the writing team were putting this story together, they were trying to think about what sort of ending they wanted for this game, and then one guy burst into the meeting room like, "Oh shit guys, I've just had a great idea for an ending!" "Oh awesome, what is it?" "Well, I've been playing a game recently, and I'd like to do what they did in that one. It's called Final Fantasy VI, and basically, the world ends." Wait, that'd be plagiarism if we took that. Who owns the right to that one? A company called Square Enix. Square Enix? But that's us! Oh yeah, we can totally use it! Dear God. So the world has a sort of apocalypse while Stasis is in Noctis. Hang on, I just said that wrong, didn't I? Ah, never mind. Then you meet up with everyone again and you have the scene from the start of the game. Several pretty okay boss fights later and you've won the game, but not before being made to pick a photo that you've gained during the course of the game to keep with you while you make the ultimate sacrifice. But as stated earlier, my only decent photo was of Cindy's chest, so that came with me. I have to say, I can't remember the last time I laughed so hard. The game ends with Noctis sacrificing himself for the greater good, but he ends up as a ghost, sitting on his throne with Luna Freya for all eternity, and they have a touching moment where they reflect on everything that's happened by looking at the picture you chose. Meaning that the two lovers were staring at a picture of Cindy's chest for the rest of time. It was the perfect way of ending the game. Nothing could have made it any better. 10 out of 10, couldn't recommend the game enough. Finally, I'd like to fire off one more shot at something I noticed in this game, but to be fair it's something I've noticed in a load of other open world games too, that I felt should be a feature. So Final Fantasy XV's open world is big, and it takes a long time to drive around, especially if a quest is sending you all over town. This means that a lot of time is spent driving around and getting to hear the same boring dialogue being played out between the others in the car is just not fun. As said, it's not just this game that does it, but I feel that there are easy ways of making these journeys more enjoyable, especially if all you're doing is going from point A to point B. Now, I was thinking maybe the characters could start a game of D&D or something along those lines while you're driving, and you could either listen in on their game or you could even make your own character and join in. With this working by being given options you could select while you're driving, such as decisions or actions your characters can make in the game. And when you finish driving to your destination, you could have the option of pausing the game and picking up later for when you get back in the car for another drive. I felt that this game was badly in need of something like this because the car journeys are long in this game and not particularly interesting, and hearing Pronto trying his best at not sucking at humour was doing my head in, but that's just a thought I suppose. In conclusion, this game isn't bad by any means, and there's definitely some enjoyable moments to be had too. But comparing this one to other titles in the franchise, well, comparing this to some of the others, they should get Game of the Year. But take my word on it when I say that there are way better titles in the franchise than this one. It does well at what it's good at, but it falls flat at what it's not good at. And while that's the most obvious fucking thing anyone has ever stated, I feel it's necessary to point out that this game plays on its strengths, but seems to not give a shit about its shortcomings. This one was a bit of an experiment in how it plays, granted, and it was a gamble, I'll give it that too, but I don't think that gamble paid off. If this was a bet, I'd say that Square Enix just about broke even here. They didn't lose anything important, but then again they didn't gain anything from it. Now, this makes it hard for me to decide if I'm going to recommend this game or not, and I think my answer to that question is yes, but only if it's on sale and you've got nothing better to do while we all sit at home doing fuck all waiting for the pandemic to end. But on the other hand, if you've got nothing else better to do and you haven't played some of the better games in the franchise, then go and play those ones instead. Finally, before closing out this video, I just wanted to quickly go off topic and talk about something regarding this channel. Now, many of you may have been wondering why this video took longer than the other ones to make, and while I could sit here and talk about what's going on in my life and how things have been on my ends during the pandemic, the real reason why I haven't been able to upload anything recently is because I've come up with a new recipe. See ya! Oh, you laughed!
Sorry. I'm sorry.